Dio Nagata. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the National Indian Education Association Conference. We want to thank the original peoples of the land that we're presenting from at Utah State University. So we acknowledge this land as the ancestral home of the Shoshone, the Ute, the Paiute, the Goshute, and the Navajo. We encourage you to acknowledge the original peoples of the land where you're from today. Let's start with some introductions. So my name is Devin Isaacs. I'm a member of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and I'm a doctoral student at Utah State University in my 4th year. I study the intersection between culture and mental health. Erica?
Hi, my name is Erica Figlin, and I am a member of the Oglala, Lakota, and Tlingit tribes. I am originally from Alabama, and I am a 4th year doctoral student in the Combined Clinical and Counseling Psychology program at Utah State University.
Tish?
I'm Tish Hicks. I am a European American. I'm originally from New York and moved out to Utah for school. I am also in the Clinical Counseling PhD program at Utah State, and I study multicultural psych and also have a bit of an emphasis in mindfulness and acceptance interventions.
Sally?
My name is Sally Mack, and I'm also European American. I'm also a 4th year graduate student at USU's Clinical Counseling program. And I study racial, ethnic differences and childhood adversity.
Melissa?
Osio. My name is Melissa Teehee. I am a professor at Utah State University. In the Department of Psychology, I am from Nebraska, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. My family moved from Oklahoma to Nebraska. And I did my doctoral degree at the University of Arizona in clinical psychology, policy, and law.
As part of our efforts to support Native American students at our predominantly white university, we created the TEACH training. So TEACH stands for Training for Educators Advancing Cultural Competence in Higher Education. This is a primarily online training meant to help faculty, graduate students, and staff interact more effectively with Native American students. And it started as a way to support Native students in a summer research mentorship program, but it's expanded beyond that. So now we implement this training with places like Residence Life and elementary school settings. We drew from research, from experiences from facilitators and faculty and graduate students, our own experiences, and the Native students that we serve to create this training. The cultural competence is something we think about a lot in clinical and counseling settings like the one that we're in now, but it's gone mostly unnoticed in higher education. So Sally will tell you more about cultural competence and its structure.
So cultural competency, as we've come to know about it and talk about it, is composed of 3 main components, including awareness, which includes awareness of ourselves and awareness of others, knowledge, and skills. So self-awareness is the ability to objectively think about ourselves. So to take a step back and mindfully observe what it is that we notice about the way that we are in the world and how we see the world around us. It involves adopting a very curious mind into these things and kind of allowing what shows up. It's having the ability to understand your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions in all sorts of situations because those change depending on where you are. And it's also encompassing so many things. So identifying what it is that we believe about the world. What do we believe to be good or bad, right and wrong? What's important? Our worldview. So what do we see when we look out into the world? How do we perceive what happens, our relationships with others, our perspectives, what it is that we value in situations in our lives, in our relationships, and then of course our biases. So what makes the way that you see the world different from others? What biases do you hold, positive, negative, neutral, that influence your behaviors, your perceptions as well? So I actually want to invite you all to pause right now and take a moment to reflect with me. When I ask you, what is your culture? What comes to mind? If you take a look at these different aspects, these different components of culture, here on the right-hand side, there's things like community, knowledge, stories, language, traditions, tools, objects, arts, food, of course, and values. Take a second and reflect on what comes to mind when you think of these categories, what represents you. Maybe some of these categories stick out more than others as being important to you. Maybe some of them less important. And maybe some of them it's hard to identify. Some of us might also identify with multiple cultures, and maybe we identify more with one than another. Maybe we're still developing in our cultural identities. Consider what comes to mind when you think about these concepts, these questions, and what else you want to know and develop with your cultural identity and your self-awareness. And now I invite you to consider how this culture, the way that you grew up, the messages you got from family, from those who share culture with you, how does this impact your attitude? How does this impact your beliefs? And has this created bias in your views of people who are of a different culture than you? Something we ask when we do cultural competency, such as with this course, is what comes to mind when you think of other cultures? What comes to mind when you think of Native Americans? What images pop up? What words pop up? And really practicing noticing what that is. So the second component is knowledge. And this is all about what is the content that you know about your own culture, especially about other cultures. There's always, always, always more to be learned. We introduce people to a lot of facts about Native American culture. I've listed some of them here, and I invite you to read over them. But something that we have to introduce to people is that the fact that there are so many different Native American tribes here in this country, so over 570 federally recognized ones, and there's a lot of variation even in those cultures there. A lot of variation and similarities too across cultures, both in the United States and then indigenous cultures across the world too. And finally, skills. So what do you do with all of this information, all of this self-awareness, all of this knowledge, right? You gotta do something with it for it to be impactful with the way that you interact with other people. And this encompasses so many things. So it could be first starting off by increasing the interactions that you have with people of a different culture than you. Of course, showing empathy, navigating differences in communication. Some cultures speak in a very direct fashion, some very indirect, and a lot of them along that spectrum. It involves taking and practicing significant perspective taking, which can be incredibly difficult to do and hard to do. But practicing, what does it mean to value something else? What does it mean to have a different worldview in this situation? And it takes a willingness to be wrong and to make mistakes and to own up to those mistakes when they're made, and a continuous ability, a continuous commitment to always be checking for those biases.
Thank you, Sally, for that overview. In building the course, we quickly realized that majority dominant individuals and institutions saw their work as acultural. And we believe that to work effectively with students, we need to acknowledge our cultures and our values. So our values really drive our motivation and how we invest our time in academia. Tish will help you engage in an activity to recognize some of those values and how you bring them into your academic setting. Tish?
So as Devin was saying, being aware of our own culture and our own values is a huge part of being culturally competent. And it's not uncommon for members of the majority culture to see themselves as acultural, to assume that everyone shares their values. So we really emphasize building awareness of one's own culture and building awareness of one's own personal values in the course. And in addition to that purpose, with previous research, we've also found that when we're focusing on external social pressure to motivate people to be more culturally competent or less prejudiced, it can actually have this reverse effect where it can increase prejudice attitudes and discriminatory behavior. So it's just another reason to spend some time helping people elucidate their own values and their own internal motivation for wanting to do this work, for wanting to be a more culturally competent educator or mentor or member of society. And research has found that when we include values clarification exercises in cultural competence interventions, when we really want to get people in touch with their own intrinsic internal motivation for wanting to do this work, that this can be one of many effective ingredients in a cultural competence intervention. So we included a values exploration exercise in our course, which we will do together here, a briefer version. And in the multicultural psychology classes that both Melissa and another member of our faculty at USU teach, they use a very similar exercise in their class. And we've actually found when we've looked at data from both those in-person and online classes that we see significant shifts in cultural competence. And again, this is one of many ingredients, but based on this research and based on our own experience as instructors, we feel it's an important ingredient. So if you're on our page, before doing the exercise, you'll see a little definition here of what values are. And then you're instructed to choose 7 values that are the most important to you. So we're going to go ahead and do that together. In order to get it all to fit on one page, I spliced up our website to fit it all on a slide here. But I just want to take you all to take a few minutes, read through this list, note in either a note if you have pen and paper, or maybe on your phone, what values jump out to you on this list as key ones? What values does it bring to mind that aren't on this list that are important to you? And one way to do this exercise is to collect them all and then try to narrow down. You might notice that certain values are related to each other, that multiple values can be encompassed by a single category label. But I just want to give you all a few minutes to run through this list and think about, if you have to choose a top 7 values, what are really integral to you? And again, as you go through this list, if you find yourself feeling overwhelmed, that there are a lot that feel like they fit, I would encourage you to, jot down everything that feels like it fits and to just kind of gradually narrow down from there. I've done this exercise many times myself, and I end up with a slightly different set every time, but my strategy tends to be categorizing sets of values together with one label, because a lot of times things are related to each other. I'll give about another minute to let you try to keep consolidating that list. If you aren't able to knock down to 7 in such a short period of time, I hope that you'll return to that exercise after our presentation to finish it up. It can be really helpful to have it very clear to us what those top values for us are and how they can be influencing our perception of the world around us, and of, you know, what we assume other people might share, but everyone has different values. All right, so for the sake of time, I'm gonna have us move on, but hopefully you at least had enough time to get a slightly narrowed list down, and I will pass it back to Devin.
Thank you, Tish. I want to stop and acknowledge this is an exercise we've done in our working groups as well. And I think if I had to narrow it down to one thing, I would say helping others feel valued is very important to all of us as a team. The education system has a long history of making students feel devalued. Now, some of you may be aware of some of that history, or you may have experienced it for yourself. Others may simply lack the knowledge of education history for Native peoples. Melissa's going to tell you some more. Melissa?
Thank you, Devin. As another component of cultural competence, we're going to talk about knowledge, and part of that is knowing the socio-political history of those with whom you work. So when thinking about working with American Indian students, there's a history of education being used as a weapon against us. And if you don't know that history in approaching students and families, then you are missing a large component of our experience. So American Indian children were forcibly removed from their homes, families, and tribes and placed in government-run boarding schools. These schools were designed to remove children's identities, to kill the Indian, save the man. Children were not allowed to speak their native languages, to wear their hair or their clothing the way they would. Children's names were forbidden and were replaced with Euro-American names. Many children experienced emotional, physical, and spiritual abuse at the hands of those who were deemed their teachers. The death rate of American Indian children in these boarding schools was extremely high. The majority of Indian boarding schools were developed in the late 1800s, but many continued to operate until the 1970s. The closest boarding school to us operated into the 80s. In the 1970s, though, there was a change in federal Indian policy regarding education, and there was a passage of the Indian Education Act of 1972 and the Indian Self-Determination Act of 1975. So American Indians have had this contentious history with the education system, and rightfully so. There's a feeling, just this underlying sort of bubbling up of distrust and wariness towards education systems. And it remains true that schools do not teach Native history, but history from the viewpoint of the colonizer. And often when American Indians are mentioned, it's limited to these historical contexts based on stereotypes, with a message that Indigenous lifeways are inferior to those of the colonizer. Oftentimes, the only place that we get to, say, experience our culture is around Thanksgiving time and dressing up in potentially a headdress that we've made out of construction paper that in no way represents our tribes. Or in a play, you might be cast as the Native person during the Oregon Trail, right? Things like that. And this lack of contemporary representation leads to limited imagined possibilities for American Indian youth. And that includes the imagined possibility of attending college or becoming college graduates. In addition, the curriculum and approach to education often doesn't align with Native values. So Tish spent time thinking about values and how we use that in our processes and our outcomes and our goals. But the US education system generally rewards individualistic and competitive values and expectations rather than prioritizing this interconnectedness and community as emphasized by tribal lifeways. So teaching and learning methods are different depending on which value system is being enacted or privileged in that environment. Additionally, American Indian students are more likely to receive exclusionary discipline, so that meaning out of school suspension or expulsion, than their white counterparts, who are more likely to get in-school suspension for the same behaviors in the same schools. So this equates to more missed instruction days, leading to the loss of education, and if expelled, less likely to have a choice of attending another school. Exclusionary discipline is associated with negative perceptions of school climate for those who experience it, and is a risk factor for negative developmental outcomes such as declining school engagement and achievement. And suspension in school is obviously also related to students dropping out. So these dropout rates and things that we hear are not related to ability. They're in no way to convey a deficit in our students, but to low light the deficits in our overall system. I also want to note that self-determination in education, there are schools that exemplify culturally relevant approaches, and there are teachers in all systems that show cultural competence. And those teachers, those individual people, often make such a difference in the lives of students. And I want to think about our resiliency as a whole. So we think of and value and are connected to our ancestors and our relatives yet to be born. And we inherit our ancestors' experiences, which includes the trauma that I've mentioned, but also includes our resilience. Devin.
Thank you, Melissa. And I think it's so important for us to realize that when we build these kinds of trainings, we should be looking at strengths and resilience as something that we can draw upon. When students feel devalued in academic settings, they can't bring themselves fully into the learning experience. And this can directly impact well-being and mental health across the board. Erica's going to tell you some more about some work that she's done with looking at things like mental health and well-being in academic settings for Native students. Erica?
Hi. So I recently did a study that focused on getting a qualitative perspective of how disabilities impact the lives of Native peoples. And one of the things that we discussed, during our sharing circles that came up frequently was the topic of mental health. So how does mental health, depression, anxiety, and other concerns impact people's lives? And this came up a lot in the context of school and education. So I am going to go over some of these results with you today. So these are some of the quotes that came up during our sharing circles for this study. And mental health was something that came up quite frequently, but I felt like these topics, these quotes kind of showed a lot of what the participants had shared and what their experiences were. So one participant shared that, mental health concerns can change the way that you interact with people and the way that people see you if you act a certain way. So this person was really trying to share that, it really impacts relationships and belonging in a sense of community, which is something that can make a very big difference in terms of our mental well-being. Another person shared that mental health concerns, if you have them, then that's probably one of the only things that you ever think about. And if you know the cause, so what started, your experience with depression or anxiety or another mental health concern, then you're probably thinking about that cause. But if you don't know that cause, then you might be wondering, like, why am I so anxious all the time? So trying to figure out, like, where is this anxiety coming from? And the people who were talking in these sharing circles really wanted to convey that mental health and well-being is something that can really affect every part of your life in every, aspect of, who you are as a person. And of course, this is going to impact education. So one of the things that came up a lot was this importance of the sense of belonging. So one person shared that teamwork was something that was really important and can really build that sense of belonging as well. So one participant shared that, her son was on a baseball team, and she shared that the coach, he was also going blind. So he was steadily losing his sight, and he really wanted to play baseball for as long as he was able to do so. And the coach was aware of his disability, and so every time he went out to pitch to the kid, the coach would ask, wait, are you able to see the ball yet? And then he would scoot up until the child was able to see the ball so that he would be prepared for his turn whenever he came up to bat. And this participant shared that her son had hit the ball, and it would have been really easy for the other kids on his team to catch the ball and throw it to second, get him out, but they chose not to. They looked at each other and they decided to, try to, get somebody else out instead. And she really appreciated that. She saw that, what the kids were doing and how they were trying to keep her son involved and feel like he was a part of the team. They really wanted him to have fun. Another person shared about the importance of perspective. So this participant shared that there was someone at her high school who had a disability, and he was the varsity quarterback, on their football team. And she also went to go and join their team, and she was really impressed that, he was the quarterback and everything. And she shared that it really changed her perspective about, people with disabilities, and that it also changed other perspectives as well. So that kind of getting that mindset, interacting with people, connecting with others, really getting to know people can really change perspective and really help people feel more included and have a greater sense of belonging as well. One thing that did come up a lot was bullying. So this is kind of the opposite of, fostering a sense of belonging. It's really exclusionary, and this participant shared that, children in her classes would get bullied for having disabilities. And then that would make them feel embarrassed to go to the special education programs that were specifically designed for them. And it made it to where they weren't able to access these services that really could have made a difference in their, education, because their sense of belonging was, minimized. Another thing, and this can kind of show you maybe a little bit about how, Native cultures can take a different, perspective whenever it comes to things like disabilities. So one thing that did come up a lot in this case were that disabilities are a sign that somebody has something important to share with the world. So one participant shared that, if there was a baby who was born with Down syndrome in the community, then it would be expected that person would come and, have gifts, and that they would share these gifts with their community, and they would be seen by the community as well. Another participant shared that, if somebody has a disability, they're going to be showing the community something that we might not be aware of. They have special gifts that we don't have that they are given. And so because of that, we need to just watch and help. So this is just a brief overview of that project. I really think that the take-home message is that belonging is something that is really important and can strongly impact, a person's ability to and sense of self-efficacy so that they can succeed in education and in life as a whole.
Thank you, Erica. I really loved how your study on disabilities with Native students in education highlighted people's experiences. And that's something I think we wanted to really do in the training as well. We really wanted to amplify those students' abilities, their gifts, their resiliency. But today we provided an overview of cultural competence. We reflected on the values that we bring into our academic settings, and hopefully you know a little bit more about the values that you bring into your setting. We talked about some key knowledge for building cultural competence, and we discussed the impact of lack of competence on students' mental health and, importantly, on their sense of belonging. To make the Teach course meaningful and centered on students' experiences, we wanted to include their faces and their voices every step of the way. So modules in the course that we talked about focused on awareness of self and others, on those knowledge pieces, and on skills, but we included interviews with the students throughout the course. And in these interviews, students talked about why education matters to them. So you begin to see, as you watch their videos, this rich diversity of perspective and experience across tribal identities, but you also see this common thread of giving back to tribal communities. And we value this too. So we want to show you some of those videos.
Yad a she a kamika yazin she adonan shligi a nanistage tachi nishle totsoni bashish chin to the goja dash check logo dashinal ekad ago sanishle adodaslet nagaha edit nasha. Okay, my name is Kamika Yazi. I am the Charcoal Street Division of Red Running Into Water, born for Big Water. My maternal grandfather is Saltwater, and my paternal grandfather is the Weaver Zia clan, and this is how I identify myself as an Navajo woman. I am from Smoke Signal, Arizona. I'm 24. I go to school here at Utah State University. My major is in health education and promotion with an emphasis in community health. I want to go to college because I'm like the first generation in my family to go, and I think I need to go. My parents told me to go like when I was in high school because they told me it's important and it's going to be like my parents. Like when they're gone, they're not going to always be there, and my school is going to provide for me, provide shelter, food, everything. So that's why I want to go to college for a better life. Okay, so this is like the Navajo Long Walk, and I feel like my people have been through a lot, and I feel like that's what motivates me. If things get harder, then like I try to push myself because they've been through difficult situations.
Yate she sedel se jumps on the ship, but uninitially, Todachini Basachin, Kasha Dashe, Dodashnella, Monozuma Creek Nasha. I just introduced myself to you in Navajo that my name's Sedell Armstrong. I told you my 4 clans, and I'm originally from Montezuma Creek, Utah, which is like the southeast corner near the Four Corners area. My grandmother, she actually went to Weber State and she got her bachelor's there. My mother holds 2 associate's degrees, so it was, in their eyes, there was like no excuse why I shouldn't be going to school. Honestly, I think that was just something that was ingrained into me at a very young age from my parents, my family. I've learned and we've always been taught that, going back through history, that a lot of our elders always told us is go get your education, that our traditional ways of life, that they won't sustain you they can only sustain you for so long, that you have to learn from the outside world and adapt with it, that you will be in through that you can take whatever you learn and come back and lead your people. So that's always been like the grounding reason why I'm here at school, is that whatever I learn here, that it's not only something that I can use to benefit myself for my personal success in the future, but something that I can eventually at some point go home and help just help the youth, let them know that, hey, I was in your shoes once, that we're not just stuck to just working dead-end jobs or anything, that we can actually go out and aspire to do good things, big things. Prior to this, every school year that we've had ceremonies done for us, specifically for education. In doing that was a family's way of saying, hey, that we support you. We know what you're doing isn't easy. We know it's going to get tough. Whenever you do have those tough times. Remember what we said. Remember our prayers. Remember these songs that you are hearing. Remember those, and through that, say your prayers, and then that will that'll reassure you. You'll get through it. So that's, for the most part, that's what helps get me through, because there are times where it just becomes so much to where when you just hear those songs, it's like a spiritual weight. It's like spiritually, it's like weight being lifted off my shoulders. So that's what I go to. Even now, I'm still trying to figure out ways to improve and be better and just get used to the, how would I say it, the culture up here. If that makes sense.
Yeah, she Brycey cells in she. Look at the she had bushes chin to the genie dash chain to the cleaning dash another. Hi, my name is Brycey Cells. I come from 4 different clans. I'm from the Navajo tribe, and I am a senior in psychology, and I'm graduating with a minor in family and human development. So my family actually made me want to go to college. I didn't really know if I had a destiny in college, but I figured, especially with my grandpa, he was the one that really told me, education's the only way you can get into the society that we live in now. So I know for sure my family was the main reason I came here, and the only reason why I stuck here again was my family. Family that I found here and family that I have at home. I think family here is what was one of the main goals or main reasons why, because I know for sure I struggled. Mentally, I did greatly, but I met a lot of great people here, and they kept me going. Knowing that I'm doing not just this for myself, but for other students, and my nieces and my nephews, I want to show them that, although I'm brown and I'm Native American and, we're the minority of the minority, we can still do stuff like this. And if we put our mind to it and, just persevere, anything's possible.
I am Cedric Manny, and I am from the Navajo Reservation. I grew up in a very small community called Kilnchi. It's very close to Window Rock, the capital of the reservation, I guess. One thing I did know was that I didn't want it to fall into the same cycle that I've been seeing around the reservation, being alcoholics and stuff. I didn't want to do that. I don't know why. I don't know what point I decided I didn't want to do that, but that's something that I didn't want to do. Another reason would probably be the money involved, and that's why I chose to go into engineering, because they seem to do pretty good. I guess it was expected of me too. I did well in high school, in academics as well, that it was expected. I didn't really know how to do anything else. A barrier for me was actually, I guess for most of us, getting the money. I see my brothers working jobs. I see they're unhappy, even though they don't tell me. I can tell they want to do more, or they prefer to do something else. I want to be someone who's passionate about what they do, so that's why I chose to pursue an education, to learn more about what I want to do.
Bonjour, my name is Megan Hamilton. I'm Anishinaabe Akwe. I'm an enrolled member of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. So education is actually the most important aside from family to me and friends, because actually I've had a past career teaching K-12 secondary science for 5 years, and then I became a professor in extension, and then I got recruited for the PhD program. And so education's really like my passion in life, teaching others. I see it really as a medium for helping others as well. So in my role as a teacher, yes, I was teaching content and curriculum, but on the side, I was really helping a lot of students gain not only a passion for STEM, which I love and adore, but also helping them with family crises, or being a shoulder to cry on when things aren't going so well in their life. So it was almost like I was a therapist on the side and a life coach, but I was also a teacher. So for me, I got my bachelor's degree in biology composite teaching, And I taught for 5 years, and I felt like I was kind of in a rut. And I wasn't progressing like I wanted to, or just I'd kind of lost the passion for education as much as I'd had in the beginning. And it could be that I was just this crazy K-12 teacher having such a busy schedule. But really what it came down to is I really missed going to school. I missed talking about the theories behind learning and things like that. And I really missed talking to adults sometimes, because all I did was I taught 7th and 8th grade science. So I actually started to do a master's level degree, and I did it remotely, but then after getting a taste for that, I thought maybe this PhD thing I could handle. And so it was really just an idea in my head for the longest time, until I actually had a meeting with a faculty member here on campus, and she thought that my resume was great. She felt like I had a good story to tell. She could tell I was passionate about the subject that I knew and loved, and then she's just like, go for it, and I went for it, and so here I am. School, like at this level, seems scary at first. No one in my family has ever gone into a graduate level program before, and so it's not like I had a model in my family to look up to, but that doesn't mean you can't find other models in your community.
Thank you all for joining us through this journey, this cultural competence journey. And I really want to highlight that it is a journey that we're all on as well as we help implement this course in different settings. We still have to think about our own cultural competence, and we want to build that together with you. So we wanted to take some time today at the end of the presentation to talk about any barriers you've experienced in developing cultural competence in your own settings. So the idea is really to further a culture of competence. So by that, I mean that we continue the work together, that we build these cultural competence communities in our own academic institutions, and that we keep the conversation going. By listening to other people's experiences, we can practice perspective taking, which is an incredibly important skill for developing cultural competence. So what barriers have you experienced in your own universities? Maybe it's a high school setting, maybe it's an administrative setting. What are those barriers that you experience to being culturally competent and to furthering that in your setting?